Welcome. My name is Tyler Sweat, Accessible Media Specialist for the Iowa Library for the Blind and Print Disabled. Today is our monthly webinar for the IMC for the month of April, and today we're going to be going over universal design for learning. Now this is a topic that it's kind of my soapbox topic, as I like to call it. It's something that I think is really important to understand and is sort of the foundation for a lot of, for anything really accessible or anything that you're doing in the classroom, anything that you're kind of building something. Having UDL in mind is the most important step to make sure that it works the best. So that's kind of why it's a topic that I was shocked that I hadn't done yet for the IMC webinar. So that's why I thought this would be a great time to go over it and just kind of go over some of the like guidelines of UDL, kind of what it is, what it isn't, how it applies to accessibility, and then just some real world examples of how, a classroom setting can kind of use them, and just sort of where you got to go from that UDL framework. Also going to show off some resources today. So let's get rocking and rolling. So we're just going to go. Okay. So kind of like I said, our little overview today, what it is, examples, schools, and then the overall impact that universal design for learning has. So first off, it is the design and composition of an environment that can be accessed, understood, and used to the greatest extent possible by all people, regardless of their age, size, ability, or disability. So this approach offers flexibility in the way students access material, engage with it, and show what they know. So pretty much to sum that up, it's something that everybody can use without major adjustments to what it is. So it's how you approach building something, whether it be a website or a lesson plan, or even, like we're going to do like some architecture. Is one of the first examples I'm going to kind of show off, is that you're building something that everybody can use regardless of what it is. And so that's why, universal design, you're just applying that to learning. So when speaking of disabilities, the blind and their needs are most often used as an example. It is deceivingly simplistic, since accessibility is something most of the population can benefit from. And so, that's the point when you think about, a lot of times people are adapting or they're building something for what I call people there with like on the fringe, right? So different abilities that exist if they exist on a timeline, you have a majority of your population in the middle, and then the outside, you're going to have people with different needs. And so if you are building it for those people on the outside of the, your fringe people, that it's more than likely going to benefit everybody in the middle just as much. And so that's why it's important to build something in with universal design to kind of meet those needs of everybody across the board. So an amazing example that I always like to bring up is curb cutouts. So these were first installed in Michigan, around the University of Michigan in 1945. They were having a lot of these veterans come back from World War II that were in wheelchairs or still had crutches. They amputated legs and those types of things that put them in a wheelchair that they didn't have a way to get down off the curb. So crossing a street became a barrier to them. Getting around became a barrier to them. So what they did is they cut the curb, right? And they just leveled it out and made a little ramp to allow people to, in wheelchairs, to cross the street effectively. But I think the impact it had was so much broader, because not only is it helping those veterans that need it, it also could help other people in wheelchairs. It could help just even a woman with a baby carriage, pushing that around, right? She doesn't have to jump the curb with the kid in there. She can just go down the curb cutout and cross the street normally. So it's one of those things that it has such a broader scope of what it was intended for versus who it ended up helping. And so I think that's just a really great example of universal design and how it ends up helping everybody involved and everyone using that. And even for something as simple like this, like it even sort of guides people on where they need to cross the street. So even if you take out people in wheelchairs or using strollers and those things, it just tells people where they're supposed to cross, because you now have a cutout which then designates this is where you cross area. So from a safety perspective, it also reaches that, checks that box. That's why it's a really perfect example of how something that was made for one person, so disabled veterans coming back from World War II, such a small population, but it affected such a broader topic, a broader version of what that was intended to use. So that's just, I love that example. So a great little study that they did, and this is about captions. So this is at a college level, using captions and just having access to them. So this is a little over 2,000 students, and it was 15 public and private universities. And so this is from Oregon State, but they used 15 public and private universities. And so it's perception of captions and then transcripts. So we're going to pop out here because it was being weird on me. Okay, so looking at this, you have 98.6% of students find captions helpful. And this is kind of the breakdown on the right side of what they use them as. So comprehension, accuracy, engagement, and retention. 52% of students that use captions, that captions help as a learning aid to improve comprehension. Now, when you think of captions, mainly you're thinking of the hearing impaired. Like that's 100%. Deaf and hard hearing is where you're going, that captions were sort of made for. But it is interesting when you look at it, 98.6% of students found them helpful. And it kind of dives into it a little bit deeper. It's how often they're using captions, with a good chunk of them using it some of the time. I mean, 71% using it some of the time is not a small number, even if they're only using it sometimes. So that's just, it shows you kind of how everyone can benefit from something as easy as captions. When we talk about ESL students, 66% of them found captions very or extremely helpful. And here's the groups that find captions helpful. So you have hearing difficulty. Obviously, it's 71%, because that's what everyone thinks the captions are designed for. But then you have your second category is that ESL. And then you just have some other ones that are kind of, they have different issues or disabilities that they're using, but they still use captions on a regular basis. The learning aid. So this one is, they're using it as a learning aid. And so that's why it just shows like, that's what captions are there for, to help with comprehension, to help and make sure that if you can't hear it, that you know what they're saying. But the other things is just really interesting, like poor AV quality. Instructor's accent was 8.3%, which I found interesting. Sound sensitive environment. If they're in the library, it might be quiet, but then they go to the union because they didn't find any space at the library and the union's louder. Just having an example of using captions in those when we talk about, reaching each end of the spectrum, and then everybody else in the middle, captions can make a big difference. And there's a few other things here talking about focus and just kind of using captions. And here's the other thing, when we talk about a lot of students using them, there's still 15% of students during this survey that didn't know how to tell if a video has captions. So you got to think within that 15%, there's definitely most of them that would benefit from having access to those captions or a transcript of what the video is about or what the speech was about. And so I think that's really important that, while most of the students did know, if there's still that 15% that we're not reaching, at least to get the access they need to just know, like, hey, if you click the CC button at the bottom of this video, it'll give you the captions. So I do think that's a really interesting kind of take and kind of looking at captions in general. And just from a perspective of understanding, I'm just another example of how, we're trying to reach ends of the spectrum, but really we're helping everybody in the middle on top of that. So when we talk about it in a school setting, so like a K-12 setting, anything that doesn't have that UDL background is going to become a barrier. So materials in the wrong format. For example, if it's a scanned document where they scan it into a JPEG, so it's just a picture, screen reader can't read it. So that's not accessible. Videos with no captions. A lot of programs now, so like YouTube, if you upload a video, it has automatic captioning on it. You have to kind of edit it. It's not perfect, but it does work. Google Slides is a perfect one for lectures because it automatically produces captions as you're going. So as you're talking, at the bottom is just going. So you could give a PowerPoint presentation to your students, and then you could have live captioning involved with that. In that scanned document like I just talked about, that text-to-speech software. So that's why I think what's great about UDL is that you're providing options. And so what that is that there's no single way. And so this is from the director of CAST, which we'll kind of show their resource off later. So options are essential to learning because there's no single way of presenting information, no single way of responding to information, and no single way of engaging students will work across a diversity of students that populate our classrooms. Alternatives reduce barriers to learning for students with disabilities while enhancing learning opportunities for everyone. That's the biggest thing, is just trying to keep those barriers down to allow them to learn at any level with any student. You know, that's the thing. All students want to learn. We want them all to be learning, and just enhancing learning opportunities for everybody. And so I think once you kind of get into it at the beginning, you know, I think UDL, when you think about like giving multiple options, presenting information differently, I think it creates this like fear in teachers of just like, oh, I have to do everything 80 times. So if I got 30 kids in the class, I have to come up with 30 different ways to present this information, 30 different ways for them to show me how to do this information. And it's not that at all. You know, I get where that comes from, just because, you know, teachers, you know, they just want to make sure they're reaching all their students. And so when you hear something like giving them options, it doesn't have to be giving each student their own sort of tailored course. It's more of them, you giving them sort of choices throughout it, and then they kind of pick the way that works best for them. So that's kind of, you know, to clear that up. So we're going to dive into the different areas and kind of how to relate them into a classroom now. So when we look at UDL in schools, and this is from CAST, is where I got the cast.org, they split it into three chunks. So the why of learning, the what of learning, and the how of learning. And we're going to go over each of these. The why of learning, engagement. So how are we getting them engaged? How are we getting them motivated for the learning that's taking place? And then the what is representation. So knowledgeable learners, how we're presenting content in different ways. So we're not just giving them a workbook to fill out, for example, or we're not just lecturing at them. So that's where that comes in. And then the how of learning. So this is action and expression. So this is how students are showing us what they know, and sort of how we differentiate those ways that they're showing us what they know. So we're going to go over each now. So engagement, individual choice. Involve all participants in whole class discussions. Display goals in multiple ways. Provide prompts, reminders, guides, rubrics, and checklists. And when you look at this, a lot of teachers are already doing this. So I think it's just sort of putting a framework to what you're doing to understand that it's UDL, kind of helps clear up some of that gray areas, you know, because when you think about prompts, reminders, guides, rubrics, checklists, you know, especially when I think in an elementary or middle school classroom, these are going to already be there. You know, you're going to walk in and there's going to already be a prompt like, what do you want for lunch today? And you take your name and you put it on the side if you're having cold lunch or you're getting spaghetti today, right? So like even something like that is just those constant checklists and consistency that when you come in. Same thing with rubrics and checklists and guides and other things, you know, even something as simple, you know, as when the kid leaves for the day, what they have to do, right? So those types of things are getting them engaged, so they have something to look at, they have something to utilize, so then they know what the steps are and just kind of where they need to go with that. When we talk about goals in multiple ways, so just like having it presented up on the wall, giving the students you know, something where they can repeat them. So like stating the goals is always a great one where you're just saying them, right? And so anytime you're going to do that, you're getting them engaged to just be involved with what the goals are and how you're going to reach them. And then whole class discussions are always good. I mean, that just gets everybody involved. And when I say whole class discussions, you know, I think you're thinking of a bigger picture than just like the teacher calling on students or pulling popsicle sticks with a name on it. You know, this could be even something like, we just got done talking about Washington. Let's turn to your partner, tell them 3 things you just learned, right? And then they'll tell you something they learned. Something like that, where everyone's talking, everyone's doing something, but it's not just like picking names out of a hat. So there's multiple ways to kind of do that. So that's engagement. So the next is representation. So this is where we're customizing how we're getting the information out. So graphic symbols with all text descriptions. And so, you know, background knowledge. And so a background knowledge is a good one, which like you're relating to your students and kind of what the background knowledge they already have. And this could be like things they've already learned, or it could be even background knowledge of just who they are as students. And so understanding, you know, where they come from and kind of what their likes and dislikes are can kind of help you take this background knowledge and apply it, you know, to what you're learning about. And then another big one is just chunking information into smaller elements, where you take something and you just kind of split it up into chunks. And so therefore, you know, you really focus on that area and it doesn't become overwhelming when you just have one big chunk you know, or instead of tiny chunks, you have one big giant lesson that can kind of get kids uninterested in that. And with graphic signals and alt text, you know, anytime you can get alt text in, I'm always down with that. And so that's why, you know, having graphic symbols with alt text descriptions. So this would be like if there's an icon for a certain thing that they know that this means that we're going to learn about sort of, let's say it's president. I keep going back to presidents. So you could have an icon of like a question mark. And then when you see that, or when that's on a sheet or something, you know, they know, or on the website, they know that like this is now going to ask a question about what you've already learned. So things like that, where you just apply graphic signals that just kind of give the student an idea of what you're going to do when you hit that spot. And then the last chunk is action and expression. So this is providing alternatives for physically responding or indicating selections. And so when we talk about this, you know, I kind of went, when you're doing whole, it's sort of the same concept as those whole group discussions, you know, or whole class interactions. You know, you're saying turn to your partner and tell them, you know, those are different ways to do that. But when you're indicating selection, so this is where you're trying to have them show you what you know. You know, this is where you could have a group, and then the group, you know, you answer the questions, and then they present that to the class. Would be an example. Or it could be you have just each student, right? And so then you could go around the classic way and have each of them kind of stand up and say something they learned, or, you know, answer the question that you have on the board, you know, those types of things. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. Provide access to alternative keyboards. So this is just having accessible technology for anyone that needs it, but also just having just anything that allows your students to express what they know. You know, I think a lot of things, as we see technology become more and more integrated into the classroom, I think just making sure that you are keeping up with the accessible technology that goes along with that is always very important. Multiple means or multiple media for communication. So this could mean, like, you know, when we go back to that group is presenting, they're talking about whatever topic they're going, and then they're going to present it. So they have the option of they could make a video, you know, they could film it on one of the kids' phones. You know, that's an option. Or another group wants to just do a poster, and they do a poster, right? They're both telling you what they know. It's just different ways of them doing that. And so that's important to kind of give the kids the option, just so then they can use their best strengths to show you what they know. Physical manipulatives are always a good one. It kind of gets kids engaged, and it's a really good way to have them show what they know. Anytime you have kids playing with blocks, you know, 3D models, base 10 blocks, anything like that, it sort of puts it in a different perspective than when it's up on the board or when it's in a video. Even, you know, if they can hold it and they can move it and they can adjust it, it's just a great way to kind of have them have it in front of them to then use that to show you what you know on that. I think with base 10 blocks, you know, that's a perfect example. So I have a first grader at home right now, and so he's one that really likes those base 10 blocks because it just clicks with him so much easier when we're working on math, that he kind of can line up the blocks. He knows how many numbers we got just based on those blocks. And so I think that's a really good one anytime you can use physical manipulatives. And provide text-to-speech software, human dictation recording. So just any time that you're going to have text, making sure that it is accessible, making sure the students that need it can get access to that. But even things, you know, having text-to-speech, using that for all your students is not a bad thing. Anytime students can just follow along with it talking to them, I think is a really good benefit. So even those students that that aren't blind, you know, it is a benefit to them too to use text-to-speech. So I think that is something that can go across the board, and it doesn't necessarily have to be just for those students that really need them. So that's, you know, one of those things when we talk about UDL is having access to everybody to help them all be successful. And so I think that's a really good one. So I know I've talked about a lot of real world examples, but I had 3 other ones that I just wanted to kind of come up and talk about some, you know, the barriers, what the barrier is and how you break it down. So a traditional textbook bogs your child down. So using it, you know, rather than having a textbook that they have to read, you know, using a video documentary, audio tapes, computer programs that cover the same material. And I understand that a lot of classrooms can't get away from a traditional textbook. That always is going to exist as far as what they need from it, but it's figuring out different ways to present the information the same way, you know, where you're trying to get that material covered, but there's just always a different way to do that to get them engaged and excited about the material. If your child is struggling to complete an assignment, talk to his teacher about an alternative way for him to show what he's learned, such as preparing a slideshow, presenting an oral report, building a model, etc. So I think, building these things in when you have a project or have something where you already have those multiple options versus someone having to come to you and saying, my kid's struggling, can you help them out by giving them a different way to do this? If you give the kids options of you can do a slideshow, present, or build a model, right? And it has to meet these guidelines to check off that you are showing me what you know, then boom, the kids kind of get a pick. Back when I was a teacher, so I taught physical education. And so the way I would handle this a lot to let kids express what they know or kind of show off the skill was like for volleyball, I would have a beach ball, I would have a softer trainer volleyball, and then a hard volleyball. And so I'd have enough that all of the groups wanted one of that type, they'd be out there. And then the group would pick the one that they wanted to use. Because when it came down to it, I was testing them on their volleyball skills. I wasn't testing them on how hard can they hit the hardest volleyball, right? So for the kids that, weren't on the volleyball team, that didn't feel as strong about, hitting the volleyball, they can still show me a bump using a beach ball, just like the volleyball girls that are on the team that are going to go to state next week. They can show me just like that on a real volleyball. And so that's where the skill was bumping, but they could use a different ball to express and show me what they know and what they learned over using that. So that's just an example of kind of, it doesn't have to be the universe of choices for them. You can still narrow it down, and you're going to meet those guidelines of making sure that everyone's learning in the way that works best for them. And the last one's about the background knowledge of your students. So a particular subject fails to spark your child's interest or student's interest, try relating it to something they're interested in and passionate about. And so that's where it's just kind of tying it together into what they're passionate about and kind of what they like. And I think, all kids have interests. It's just you kind of having to build that relationship and figure out what they like and how you can apply it to what you're going over. So I think that's a really big one, and teachers spend enough time with their students that, they are going to build that relationship. And so they should be able to kind of have a greater understanding of what they like and don't like to kind of help them out, to get them interested about the topic. So those are my three, kind of showing the barrier and then what you need to do to kind of help fix that. Now, one other thing I want to talk about real quick is technology and Braille. So I think a lot of times with UDL, there could be a misnomer that, if you just build it correctly and you sort of get all the parts or pieces in a row, that now all of a sudden Braille is no longer important, right? Like, well, the screen reader can read it and everything is all text and all these other things. So the student doesn't need Braille anymore. And that's still, Braille is still a really important part of a student's learning. Braille is reading. And so I think that giving a student, even text to speech, it technically it's audio, it's reading, but really like it's reading is on a different level with Braille. And so that's why it's still a really important part of any student. But by making documents accessible, when we're talking about electronic Braille, it allows so much easier use for that student if they're using a Braille device. And so that's why I just wanted to make them, just kind of clear that up, that technology never replaces Braille. Braille still has an important part with all students in their learning, just because Braille is something that they're going to be using for the rest of their life. And if you look at blind people that are employed, I think it's roughly about 85% of them use Braille every day in their job. So it's something to realize that Braille doesn't go away once they get out of school. It's something that's more than likely going to be with them for a long, for their whole life. And so that's why I think it's still important to keep up with the Braille and make sure that you're getting documents that are accessible so that they can get electronic Braille or get it in the way they need it. So kind of last thing here, because the impact of UDL is that we're trying to identify the strengths, needs, and interests of individual students. And we're doing that by removing barriers to learning and realizing that small changes can help all students. And motivating students with more choices. The more choices students have, the more motivated they are. If they knew that every Monday when they came in, that it was worksheet day, and then they would not be motivated to come in on Monday. And so that's why it's just realizing by giving them a few different choices, that it just helps keep them motivated, and it allows them to be successful and be excited about learning. And so I think that's just a really big impact of what it does. So we're going to check out CAST now. We're going to go back to here. So CAST is the one that came up with these guidelines. And so this is udlguidelines.cast.org. You can also go to cast.org and find these. But it just does a really good job of kind of splitting it up into each area. So if we look at, what we talked about, the why, the what, the how, if you go down here, it has all of these different pieces that fall under each. So then along the side here, internalize, build, and access are the other three on the other side that they split up. And so I think it does a really good job of giving examples and kind of walking through different things. I like barely scratched the surface as far as what UDL is and how to access it. And so I think just, if you have time to go through and just kind of click on some of these and kind of show off. So if we go to recruiting interest, I'm going to click on that one. It'll take you to a whole different page that explains what it is and sort of the checkpoints that go along with that. So optimize relevance, value, and authenticity. So if you click on that, it'll then give you a whole thing about that, including examples. And it just does, I think it's just a really good job of kind of showing off how you can make your classroom fit the UDL guidelines. And I think it's just a great way to kind of look at what you need to do to reach that and just make sure that your students are learning the best they can. And so that's why I think it's just a great, absolutely fantastic website to kind of base off what you're doing to set up your classroom. If there's any questions, I'll take those now. I do realize I did scratch the surface. We do have a few videos on our YouTube channel about some other UDL stuff, just some like short, short like little videos kind of talking about, kind of what UDL is in a short format and some other things. So that's why I think it's just that's why it's my soapbox topic. It's something that I think is really important, and it does make a big difference when you do apply those, with a logical sense, and it really helps set up your classroom in the best way possible. So I'm not seeing any questions. Always feel free to email me with any questions you have or any kind of guidance or help that I can be. And other than that, that's all I got. So I will see you all in May. And I think that's going to be our last one until the fall. So we're going to kind of take a break over the summer. We got a lot of other programming and other things that we're doing in the summer. So we're going to kind of take a break from there. But anyway, thanks for coming.